Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life has been captivating fans of the farming sim genre for years. It ranks towards the top of many fans' favorite Harvest Moon games. This is despite de-emphasizing the farming mechanics that make Harvest Moon so popular. Why is that? Isn't the whole point of a farming sim to farm? For most farming sims that would be true, but Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life is able to shirk the status quo and still remains popular because it creates a profound experience for the player, utilizing its unique 30-year structure and its focus on social interactions. Mechanically, A Wonderful Life is one of the most clunky and tedious games in the franchise. Crops must be planted one by one, specific patterns are encouraged, and watering is done one square at a time for most of the game. The animal mechanics, though realistic, are also cumbersome, and the player is likely to make mistakes that lead to huge setbacks, whether that be buying a goat that cannot give milk past a certain point, or not impregnating cows before they stop giving milk. Despite the clunkiness, the game is still played and remembered to this day, with a remake already out in Japan. This is likely because A Wonderful Life has multi-year character arcs, so the player is able to get to know the characters through time, and does not need to focus on the clunky farming mechanics. The problems of Forget-Me-Not Valley feel more real, as they are closer to the problems we face in the real world. Instead of one-off requests like you would get in most games, we get to see people struggling with loss, financial distress, and interpersonal issues, and how they both deal with these issues and are affected by them over time. This temporal element allows issues to be explored from different angles, and for the consequences to be felt more realistically and fully than in a traditional game, where you might get one or two pieces of dialogue right after an event occurred, and you're unable to see the effects of the events years down the road. That is why, despite A Wonderful Life touching on some of the darkest themes in the franchise by far, including death, loss, and loss of loved ones, it has still managed to send a powerful message that resonates with gamers to this day. A Wonderful Life is the most realistic look at a person's life that we have ever had in the farming sim genre, or in video games in general. The game utilizes its multi-year structure to explore themes and ideas over time. The first and one of the most prevalent themes is death, and the loss that accompanies the death of a loved one. Death is not usually harped on in video games. Video games are usually escapist power fantasies. Some characters may die in a game, but those moments are typically reserved for the villains who the player cares less about, or for important plot points that help motivate the protagonist to move forward, or to add emotional weight to key moments. Rarely is death a major theme. In A Wonderful Life, on the other hand, the game starts with the main character's dad dying, and you inheriting his farm. Although this is not a unique setup for a farming simulator. In other games in the genre, death is generally glossed over and forgotten about. In A Wonderful Life, your dad's former business partner works and lives on the farm with you and narrates the transitions between chapters. These narrations are written to your late father, reminding you of his death at key points in the story. Death is also interwoven throughout the game as well. Before the game starts, the main character's dad dies. Throughout the game, your animals may die. In Chapter 2, Nina dies. In the end, the main character dies. The temporal elements of the game allow death to be a consistent presence in every playthrough. The older you get, in the real world, the more these themes resonate with the player. In the real world, animals die, people die, and the fact that you too will die someday becomes harder to ignore. Just as in A Wonderful Life, the fact that the game has cemented the themes of death, and the main character appears to be rapidly aging, makes this inevitable death hard to ignore. The fact that the character will get old and die creates a feeling of apprehension as the character ages. Once Chapter 2 starts, the player may notice that Galen, the old man, is no longer walking around with his wife. If the player speaks to Galen, he is not his old cheery self and may just ignore the player. If the player follows him, it becomes clear he has moved across the river, and if the player moves closer, a gravestone can be seen. He becomes less talkative, he has moved across the river to interact with people less, and he is understandably gloomy, as most of us would be if our spouse had died. Nina died, not to protect us all or to save the world. She was not killed by a villain that the player can vanquish or eliminate some sort of evil from the world. She just got old. She died. Galen will need to live out the rest of his life without her companionship. And he does. He will eventually get a bit cheerier, but he can never fully recover from Nina's death. Moving on, but never being able to regain everything that was lost. Most of us have people in our lives that we could never fully replace or recover from their deaths. As time goes on, it gets easier and a new normal emerges, but memories of that person can still hit like a truck, and it is not possible to be exactly as we were before the loss. Living with that pain and trying to press forward anyways is a task that's left with those who remain. Much like in A Wonderful Life, we are able to help each other to some degree by providing companionship, friendship, empathy, and a place to vent or grieve. But each person's life carries on, and they must carry that weight themselves. Death is not the only instance of A Wonderful Life not shirking away from more harrowing aspects of real life. Each of the three bachelorettes also experiences real-world problems, and they are explored to some extent over time using the game's advantage of being a 30-year narrative. Cecilia, the first bachelorette, is being pressured into an arranged marriage that she does not want to be a part of. The main character is not able to help her, except by marrying her. In the end, she ends up not going through with the arranged marriage, and if not married by the end of Chapter 1, stays single throughout the rest of the game. Cecilia will generally go on as a happy single, but does complain about men not growing up. Muffy, on the other hand, has had her heart broken numerous times before the events of A Wonderful Life. She was cheated on in a past relationship in the city, which has left a mark on her psyche. She is looking for a spouse in Forget-Me-Not Valley, as it is her hometown and where she wants to end up. Muffy is the only bachelorette the player can date before marrying, and if you marry someone else after dating Muffy, she will confront the player. Given the context of her past experience with infidelity, the scene hits hard. If the player does not marry Muffy, she ends up lamenting growing older and never finding someone to spend the rest of her life with. Muffy's problems are relatable in a way that most video game problems are not. This is due to the temporal element of A Wonderful Life, the fact that the player sees and interacts with her over time, and sees the optimism about finding a partner slowly fading away as she ages. It is both grounded in reality and genuinely sad. Nami is a drifter and staying at the local inn for very little rent. She does not have a job and eventually runs out of money. Towards the end of the first year, the player can trigger conversations with her where she will reveal her money troubles and intent to move out of Forget-Me-Not Valley, even though she'd prefer to stay. If the player marries her, or offers to let her move in and help on the farm, which also leads to marriage, she will stick around, but if not, she will leave the valley. It is possible for her to come back if a specific scene is triggered, but it's also possible for her to never return. Along with the bachelorettes, many other characters are dealing with problems that develop over time. Van is constantly attempting to lose weight with poor results. Murray is trying to save money to be able to go home to see his family. Daryl is dealing with the troubles of being too smart and crazy for his own good. The list goes on, and the player is strongly encouraged to participate in the social aspect of the game to check up on these problems. The game forces the player to get married by the end of year 1, and have a kid to sink time into influencing. All of the best tools come from befriending villagers. Growing crops, which is time-consuming, is not very profitable, so fruit trees and livestock are inherently pushed by the game as a means of making money. Taking care of livestock and fruit trees does not take much time at all, and time moves fairly slowly in A Wonderful Life. Unless the player sleeps multiple times a day, there's a lot of free time to give gifts to villagers, chat with people, and accidentally trigger cutscenes. There are also not many other side activities. There are a few festivals, but your house and tools do not need to be upgraded. The mine is only 1 level, and there is just not much to sink money into. As time passes, the player is likely to become less serious about farming, and more focused on relationships, triggering cutscenes, and influencing the direction of their child's future. The mechanics, instead of focusing on the financial aspect of having a farm in Forget-Me-Not Valley, focus on how the character's responsibilities and life changes as he ages. The game starts with the player mostly encouraged to farm and find a wife. There is very little responsibility. If the player fails to farm, nothing happens. If the player does not pursue romance, the player is given the chance to marry Cecilia. The player can even break the heart of the other bachelorettes with no consequences, save for a bad reaction. On the other hand, as the player ages, they inherit more responsibility. The player can no longer neglect their responsibilities. If the player neglects their wife, there will be a divorce and the game will end. If the player does not make any money, they will also get divorced and the game will end. As the character ages, he is given more familial responsibilities, and the game shifts its focus more and more towards the family and relationship dynamics of gameplay. I also believe there's an element of meta-commentary with these decisions. It's like the game is telling you that if you do not enjoy the social or farming aspects of the game, then you should stop playing. A Wonderful Life also ends if the player decides not to get married. Perhaps Marvelous felt that if the player did not enjoy the core aspects of the game, then pushing through and continuing playing the game all about living out one's wonderful life would create ludonarrative dissonance and would be antithetical to the game's core themes. After all, the premise of A Wonderful Life is that the player is walking through said wonderful life step by step, as the main character and those around him age, and live out their lives as well. If the player does not enjoy moving through the main character's life and the day-to-day gameplay, could it really be described as a wonderful life? The story being told through the chapters of a man getting older, having a family, and raising a child are supported by the shift in gameplay that the limited uses for money and the likely player focus on building relationships and influencing their child encourage. The lack of ludonarrative dissonance creates a compelling experience that allows the player to immerse themselves in the social and familial aspects of a wonderful life. This immersive experience also rings true to life. As one grows older, makes more connections, puts down roots, and has a family, they accept the responsibility of caring for others. As the game goes on, and the player grows more and more immersed in the world, characters continue to age and their arcs come into focus. The kids in the valley grow up, including your own, and eventually your character dies. The player sees the main character's wife and child, as well as the other villagers whom your character predeceased, coping with your death. You get a send-off from Takakura, and the game ends just like that. It feels a bit anticlimactic because it is. In most games or stories, where the main character dies, it is for a purpose. Maybe the main character sacrifices themselves for the greater good or to protect someone they care about. In A Wonderful Life, the main character dies of an unknown disease relatively young, around 50 years old. This is potentially a dark ending, as it reminds us of how we are likely to pass on. There is no choice or greater meaning, just the gods of randomness deciding that today will be the day that the inevitable will occur. But is that all A Wonderful Life has to offer us? You live, you have some problems, you have some responsibilities, and then you die? I do not believe this to be the case. The game is called A Wonderful Life for a reason. Although the protagonist's life is short, he's able to make a family, see his child grow up, and make meaningful connections in Forget-Me-Not Valley. In the end, Takakura says the main character lived a good life and did everything he had to do. It shows people moving on to some extent, but notes Forget-Me-Not Valley is a little lonelier now. Just as Galen did before, and likely the main character in Takakura did before Galen, the citizens of Forget-Me-Not Valley will need to keep on living their lives, and hopefully they were positively impacted by the main character. I believe the positive way Takakura explains your life in the end partially plays into the game's obvious themes of connection being important. The game does not give you a rundown of your economy or the speed at which you got to some point or a farm score. Instead, you get to see the people mourning the loss of the main character and what has become of your son. It is not about how well you did playing the game, but about the friends and family that you left in Forget-Me-Not Valley.